listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. Once again, thank you for joining us as you do each and every week. A couple bits of information before we get started with this week's episode. Reminder to leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. Review doesn't have to be long, but I tell you what I'd really like to do is ask you guys to just leave the name of the guest of the episode that you like the most. To me, that's something I think we don't hear enough of, the episodes that you guys really liked. So if you'd like the show, and we know you do, leave us that 5-star rating, but also just tell us which guests you really like the most and which episodes you really, really enjoyed. That way we get some good feedback on the type of guests you guys want going forward. Also a reminder, follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Hazard Ground Podcast, at Hazard Ground. We're easy to find. We're all over the place. Now we're on Podcast One, so if that's the format which you like to listen to all your podcasts on, find us on Podcast One, as well as Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, of course. That's the way to go. Lastly, reminder about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on that Amazon banner right in the middle of the homepage. We keep telling you about this every week. Why? Because it's working. You guys do your normal Amazon shopping. When you go through the Hazard Ground page, we get a kickback of everything you guys spend, and we donate it to a charity that's featured here on the Hazard Ground. So by going to our website, clicking on the Amazon banner, you are directly helping out vets all across America, and that is a great thing. Now on to this week's episode. Joining us this week is actually a friend of mine. It's one of the few times I get to interview somebody who I've known personally for quite some time. He is a former E4 in the United States Army, and in his short time in the Army had one deployment that was, hell and back for him. He suffered multiple injuries, TBI, included losing some friends overseas. He now is a veterans advocate and also serves as a practice lead with one of the world's most respected management and strategy consulting firms. He is Adam Mattis, joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Adam, good to talk to you, buddy.
Mark, what's going on, man? It's been a while.
It has been. Again, as I just said, I don't get a chance to talk to many people that I have, prior experiences with, because a lot of this is about other people's stories. But you were one of the guys on the list that I wanted to hit, knowing that what you went through and where you were and everything else, as you and I connected years ago back in Baltimore when you were doing some work for Under Armour, which, for those who don't know, Under Armour's headquarter company based right out of Baltimore, Maryland. And I was there for a while. And so Adam and I had crossed paths after I got back from my first deployment, and he had got back from his deployment. And so we instantly connected, and lo and behold, developed a friendship and a relationship over these past couple of years. So it's great to have you here, and I want to start back at the beginning. And funny, because we asked this question of everybody at the beginning of the podcast, and I don't even know, how did you get in the Army?
Man, Mark, it's crazy. I mean, I like to say most of the time that my story is very typical, right? I mean, there's nothing unique about me or nothing special about my story. I think it's kind of just the every person's story of anyone that was in, OIF 3, 4, 5. But I guess my path in is kind of different. So I've been this technology guru running from that persona my entire life. When I was in high school, I kind of had a reputation for being a little inquisitive, we'll say. I asked a lot of questions, and they got me in a lot of trouble. So between that and baseball, those are the two most important things to me, was just causing trouble and playing baseball. So there was one day I asked too many questions in history class, and I accidentally started a consulting company. The way that happened was I was sitting waiting for the principal, and a gentleman came in and said, "We're looking for somebody to teach our senior citizens at our nursing home how to use computers." And I heard the principal yell out of the office. He says, "Mattis, you've got two choices. Either you go teach those seniors how to play or how to use computers, or you don't play baseball." So next thing I know, I'm teaching senior citizens how to use computers. And I did that for a few years until I graduated. And then I accidentally started a consulting firm where all of those senior citizens had sons, daughters, nieces, and nephews who had law firms or had doctor's offices. And they were all looking at how to use technology to make their businesses better. So while I was an undergrad, I ran that business. And I had an opportunity right after I graduated to sell that company. It was to another local firm that wanted some of the contracts I had.
Wait, graduated in high school or college?
No, this is college. So
okay,
this was
okay.
I ran the company for about 6 years.
Okay, so you started it in high school and went through it in college.
I did.
Okay,
I did. It bankrolled my first undergrad.
Wow.
And so I sold it. I'm like 22, 23-year-old kid. I've got $28,000 in my pocket. So the first thing I did was roll to Pittsburgh, and I bought a Lexus because, what other thing does a kid with a little bit of money do other than buy a car?
Mm-hmm.
And on the way back to my parents, I'm thinking to myself, I've never been a technology guy, right? Mark, you and I, we're about the same height, right? So
Yep.
I think NFL was never in either one of our futures, but baseball probably wasn't either. But I was thinking, what's the most athletic thing I can do now as this early 20s guy? And I drove by a recruiting station, and I was like, that's it. God has spoken. I'm going to be in the military. So I rolled in, and I said, I want the most athletic job that will make my mother lose the most sleep. And he says, well, I've got this thing that'll give you a $40,000 bonus and a guaranteed deployment you in. And I said, where do I sign? So that was my door in.
What year was this?
Oh, man. I think this was November of 2003.
Okay, so 9/11, everything had already happened. We had 2 wars that had kicked off by this point in time. None of that deterred you?
No, not at all. I mean, that's what I wanted. I mean, like I said, I was a kid who had a chip on my shoulder that was more ego than anger. And I just wanted to go do fun things that were really hard. And I think I had a sense of what I was asking for, but it's kind of like that show that used to be on MTV, True Life, where they used to say, you think you know, but you have no idea. And I think that's where I was. I think I had like this image of, I think I just watched Black Hawk Down. So Matt Eversman's movie, right?
Yep.
Where I thought I knew what it was all about. And I thought I knew what the darkness and the hard days would be like. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Do you know what happened to the company you sold?
It was kind of wrapped into another company that was bought by another company and bought by another company. And I think that company was eventually rolled into some kind of a Comcast subsidiary. So I sold my contracts to a local internet service provider who was sold to another, who was sold to another. And I think the last time I tried to track it down, it was actually rolled into Comcast.
Interesting. Now, when you say consulting firm that you had started, like what sort of consulting? Was it technology consulting, or is this just, advice? I mean, give me some more background.
Yeah. So at its peak, I had about 10 people on the payroll, and we were doing things like I worked with a lot of car dealerships who, for the first time, were looking at how do we start selling cars online. In the early 2000s, late 90s, that just wasn't a thing. And now it's the only way you would buy a car. But then they didn't know how to do it. And it was things like doctors who would say, I've got this entire exam room full of medical records. How can I make that not a thing so I can actually use this to turn more patients faster? So it was really the first days of e-commerce and the first days of electronic records, just some really basic stuff. I mean, in today's terms, very basic, but at that time, just not a lot of people were doing those things, especially in small towns like I grew up in.
Interesting. All right, let's go back to basic training. You arrived there. First experience is what? Did you think you had made a mistake? What were you thinking?
Mark, honestly, I think because of, how I went through school and running my own business and, being responsible for making other people's payroll, basic training wasn't a thing for me. I mean, I was in pretty good shape physically. So I lost weight in basic, but it was because I wasn't getting the workouts I was used to. And, once you realize that everything that they're doing and everything that they're saying and all the yelling, you just don't have to think. And for me, for the first time in my life, I didn't have to think. I just shut it off, did exactly what I was asked to do. And that was it. I mean, physically it was fine. Mentally, there's some things that push you. And for me, I think the hardest part was, it was the first time in my life where I'd been experienced a cultural diversity. And I didn't really have a problem with it from my perspective, but I think it was how other people interpreted and perceived me as being just some white kid with a college education in the military. That was the hardest thing. But as far as the typical rigors of basic, none of that was really a thing for me.
Well, I mean, that's for everybody. I always ask because everybody perceives it differently. I mean, through the prism of your own experience, what you went through and what the same guy standing next to you went through were vastly different. So to that end, what you get at a basic, and like you said, I think realizing the purpose of the whole thing allows for less resistance, right? Because you realize there's a bigger picture involved, and sometimes you get myopic while you're there because you're going through it, and all of a sudden you realize that this kind of sucks. All right, so let's move forward from there. You finish your advanced individual training. What's next?
Yeah, so that was in early 2004. It was the one station training, so I think they were trying to ramp up the brigade combat teams fast.
Yeah.
And they were doing just a lot of that stuff, run through 16 or 18 weeks, whatever it was. and graduated, hit the ground at Fort Stewart. I believe it was either on Memorial Day weekend or 4th of July weekend. I don't remember which exactly. But everybody was on leave. So there was our platoon sergeant and maybe 4 or 5 of us who were just coming in process. We came in, we basically ran in the morning, and we went back to the barracks and hung out for the afternoon. And it wasn't until that first Tuesday after the holiday where I got to meet everybody. And we were told that, I arrived at Fort Stewart and I was part of 141 Field Artillery. And I think I was there for a grand total of a month before they launched 4th Brigade and split us off into 176 Field Artillery. And we were the first brigade combat team to deploy. So we basically had, less than 6 months to organize, train up, NTC, field exercises, and hit the desert.
Wow. I mean, that's a pretty fast turnaround, to say the least.
Yeah, it was crazy. So I went to OSIT at Fort Sill, learned all about field artillery, fired exactly 5 rounds in my entire career, and I'd never set foot in a gun again. I mean, after that, it was, we're not really sure what your mission's going to be. It's either going to be personal security or something in this central Baghdad area. So we're just going to teach you all this stuff you never learn anywhere else, and you're going to learn it fast. And we saddled up.
So, I mean, did you feel like everything that you had signed up for to this point was what you wanted?
I think mostly. I think what I had expected was maybe a little bit more of an intensive experience at that point. Just kind of the pace of training and everything else. I think I expected something different. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. It wasn't as physically demanding as I thought it would be. But the things that I did notice that were more challenging were just kind of the politics of the military, the politics of a government job, and understanding how the system works and how nothing ever moves as fast as you think it should, and it's never as efficient as you think you should. One of the things that was interesting about me is when I first got there. So imagine this, if you will. An E4 rolling up to a field artillery company, driving a brand new Lexus, right? I mean, so I it's funny. So my commander at that point, we've become pretty good friends since. And he said, we didn't know what to think of you. We thought you're either some spoiled kid or a drug dealer. We just didn't know what to do. so I had that going for me. But then when I got there, they also didn't have a place for me. They were scaling up and ramping up so fast that for my first few weeks at Fort Stewart, I was living out of my car. So thank God I'd bought, that beautiful Lexus, because otherwise it would have been a pretty crummy first few weeks with not even a comfy leather seat.
And oh, by the way, for those non-military listening, if you don't understand the pay structure of the military, E4s, I mean, what were you taking home? $900, $1,000 a month, right? When it was all said and done?
I don't remember the take home.
I mean, a paycheck, some
tax was like $1,300.
Yeah. And so you're taking home about, every 2 weeks, you're taking home about $900 to $1,000 a month. So, do the math. You're not talking about a major salary. A Lexus is a fairly expensive vehicle. So to see somebody of a lower enlisted rank, not only one, have a car, but two, to roll up in a really expensive car, it definitely would have turned some heads. So for the non-military folks listening, wanted to give them some background. But did you feel like you struggled fitting in?
No, I mean, not really, because I think, once you get there, and it's, look, I mean, at this point, let's just call it what it was. It was a boys' club. I mean, we were a combat unit. There wasn't a single female anywhere to be seen. And it was, the best way to describe it was a fraternity with guns and grenades. I mean, everybody gave me a hard time and busted my balls for the first few weeks. But then after that first field exercise, I mean, we were all brothers then, and none of it mattered. I mean, guys were lining up to say, hey, I'm taking my family out to Six Flags Atlanta this week. Let me borrow your car. So, I mean, that's just how it was. I mean, there's that initial apprehension, but once everyone gets to know everyone and we understand that, hey, we're all in this together, and, we don't know what we're getting into the next 6 months, and let's just kind of bro out and make the best of it. That's kind of where we ended up. And it's a pretty special place. I mean, a lot of those guys, I'm still in contact with to this day. The funny thing is, and I'm sure you can relate, I mean, it's the only time in your life where you meet people for relatively a short amount of time, right? So my entire time in service was just shy of 3 years. And there's people in that 3-year time frame that I maybe only knew for 14 or 16 months. and I might not have seen them for a decade or more. But if they walk in the house today, it's like I just saw them yesterday, and I'd do anything in the world for them.
Yep.
And I think there's just something special about that environment and those circumstances that make everything else that makes life hard irrelevant, because you're literally going to do the hardest job anyone could ever ask of you, and you do it with a smile on your face, and you do what you're told, and you drive on, and you make the best of it. And those bonds are pretty special.
And just we bring this point up a lot, and just to kind of shed some light on it for, again, maybe the non-military people listening. Here's the difference. I mean, like, you see people who have gone through unfortunate circumstances in life, i.e. maybe it's, just to be frank about it, there's a sexual assault, right? And they're around other sexual assault survivors. And that is a singular solitary event that may haunt them for the rest of their lives. There is a big difference between a singular solitary event that stays with somebody and a repetitive day after day after day after day after day after day for an extended period of time of a traumatic event over and over and over and over again that changes the dynamic of the bonds between soldiers in war, Marines, airmen, whatever it may be. And what you alluded to, we've said all the time. There are guys I haven't spoken to in 10 years from my deployment. Walked in the room, we'd hug each other like we just saw. We've been best friends for a decade, and not a day has gone by without talking to each other. It's just it's the dynamics of the corporate culture, but it's also the struggle that you go through together in war and surviving it that makes it forever. Makes you forever connected. So agree 100% on that. All right.
Mark, and that's a damn good point. I think it's something we need to be, in essence, a little thankful for, because you mentioned a lot of these other traumas that people go through, and you start looking at the 22 a day statistics and things like that. For all of the crap that we all went through in the hard, horrible days, the most important thing that we have is each other. I mean, we're never alone. I mean, I live in San Antonio now, so I throw a rock and I hit. I mean, literally, the guy that lives next door to me was an infantry officer. So no matter what, I mean, for how horrible all this stuff was, there's such a broad community out there that's there to be supportive and there to talk you through it. And I think, you look at all the trauma that's out there. In essence, we're pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, it's a fortunate brotherhood that we stand in, and sisterhood for that matter. I didn't want to, put off any of the females out there, but you get the point. And so to that end, it's part of the reason why I've stayed in so long. I'm coming up on 20 years here in May as we record this in the beginning of March. And everybody always tells you that it goes by so fast, and you never think that it does until you start getting through it and you realize, where did 20 years go? And you stay around so long because, well, if I didn't deploy twice, I probably would have never stayed, because I would have gotten bored and left, and there wasn't that connection to something greater. And until you have that real experience, I think the service in and of itself sometimes can be a little bit, as you would understand, a little bit less fulfilling than what you'd think, right? There are people who do it because they absolutely love it, right? And I truth be told, I wasn't one of those guys. I didn't get in because I absolutely loved it. I signed up pre 9/11 to pay for college. So it was more of a necessity, a means to an end, than it was a decision about my life or any sense of overwhelming patriotism, like many of the people on the podcast who signed up after 9/11, So I think that this organization and the military in general, everybody reacts differently to it, but it also draws different things out of different people.
Yeah, that's a great point. The thing that's interesting about that is, we all have different stories coming in. But when you stand there, at reception before you hit basic training, none of those stories matter anymore. And you get your haircut, and you get your uniform, and you get your boots, and none of it matters. It doesn't matter where you came from, what your experience was. Right there in that moment, you're all exactly the same. I mean, it might be that you're exactly the same in that you're absolutely nothing, but you're all exactly the same, and you've got that fresh start. And, as you continue to process all of that and grow, I mean, you kind of do it together. I mean, all the things that make you different and unique are what bring you together as a strong team. It's a really cool thing.
Okay, let's get back to your deployment. So when do you actually hit ground in country in Iraq? What are you told, and what's your mission? Do you know anything?
So we kind of knew going in that we were going to be in central Baghdad. So we started off doing a lot of personal security escort for Department of State, high value targets, anyone that came through. Our AO was basically, I guess would be western central Baghdad into Sadr City. So and the occasional money run to the airport, but I mean, it was really kind of that downtown area. We didn't know what to expect. I mean, 4th ID was the group we were replacing, they'd been there for 18 months. It had been a long 18 months, but relatively quiet. So I think, we kind of walked in with a little bit of a confidence. The group we were replacing had been hit a lot, but they had lost one person, and that was it. So I think we were coming in, we were feeling strong, we were feeling good. We were told since the beginning that, we were an experiment that was going to prove out to be the best idea that the military ever had, which is kind of ironic how those ideas have influenced my career since then. But nonetheless, we hit the ground, landed in Kuwait off that World Airlines jet, and it was just like a big desert trip. We got on our first bus with, the Kuwaiti nationals driving us, and we hit Camp New York, and it was just like continuing field exercises, just intense and in the desert versus intense in central Georgia.
Yeah, well, the heat and humidity was about the same, I would assume. For those who have never been to either Kuwait or Savannah, in the outskirts of Fort Stewart, yeah, it's pretty miserable. Okay, so what time frame is this? What month, year? Beginning of 05?
So this was actually the exact opposite of what you're describing. This was December, so this was
okay, yeah.
December 04, and it was freezing. I mean, unless you've experienced a desert cold, look, I grew up in Western PA, so if you look at the temperature there right now, it's cold. But it's a whole different thing than those desert cold nights. It was frigid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. All right. When do you actually move north?
So we got the order we were going to move into Iraq in early January. And I don't know how many folks you've talked to that have done similar things, but we are responsible for driving our own vehicles up. And at this point in time, I think we fell back into some 114 up armored Humvees when we got in country.
Yeah.
But the vehicles we brought from Fort Stewart were just soft doors. And, we had the choice of either leaving the doors on or taking the doors off and driving in. And I think we were coached to take the doors off, and we rolled from Kuwait right into downtown Baghdad. And, if you contrast how things were when we left versus how they were when we came in, that 12 months, at the end, you never would have done that in a million years.
No, yeah, and I was there the exact same time. I was there from February of 05 through April of 06, so you and I plowed the same fertile turf, and Route Tampa must have been scenic at that point in time.
Yeah, my favorite part was driving through the litter left from the Gulf War.
Yeah.
Just before you cross the border. And, Mark, that's actually really funny. So you were talking about how fast time goes. Last night I was watching the George W. Bush movie. I guess it's a biopic. But it occurred to me that more time has passed between our deployment and now than when the Gulf War ended and we would have gone in. So, if you would think snapshot basic training, how old those guys from the Persian Gulf War must have seemed, to how old we are now, it's crazy. Time sure does fly.
Yeah, that's unreal. I never even put it in that context. And for those not known, Route Tampa was kind of the main thoroughfare from southern Iraq, where on the Kuwaiti border, all the way up to Mosul in northern Iraq. So it was just that one main road that kind of dissected the country. All right, so you move forward. Once you get up towards Baghdad, do you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing?
So we didn't, not really until we got there. I'm sure people that made a lot more money than I did knew, but we didn't. It was just get the vehicles there and we'll fall in with this 4th ID unit and we'll learn our mission. So I think when we first got there that day, one of the vehicles had been hit. And I think I remember just kind of standing there, hanging out on the fob at that point and seeing this truck roll in just toasted, but everybody jumping out happy and smiling and laughing. And I'm like, if this is deployment and this is combat, they seem to be doing all right after 18 months. How bad could it be?
Well, obviously you'll find out. And refresh my memory, because I'm just trying to think. When I first got there, roadside bombs were a thing, but they weren't like a thing. Like by the time we had left, it had really they had taken them to a whole new level all throughout 2005 towards the end into 2006. So, how quickly do you start to experience some of this stuff?
So it's real interesting, and I can draw a perfect line in the sand. So up until April of that year, roadside bombs were basically C4 in a Coke can, maybe some tripwired hand grenades, and they were starting to detonate 155 artillery rounds but they couldn't get the primary charges to detonate. So in an artillery round, there's the charge at the top of the round that is used to detonate the rest of the round. So there's the fuse. I guess it would be like the detonation charge and then the main charge, but they couldn't get those main charges to go. So you'd roll over one of these in a Humvee, it'd pop off and it'd blow the combat locks in your doors would go open, little concussion, shut them and drive off, but it wasn't a big deal. But that all changed in April. That's when the EFPs first started showing up, and that's when we lost our first guys. So, interesting context to remember as we continue the story is this was one of the first EFPs seen in theater, and it was a single barrel EFP on an on-ramp, explosively formed projectile. I'll let you kind of explain what that is. But it was a truck with 3 of our guys and a Georgian, the country of Georgia national in it, and a single barrel EFP, one explosive, killed all of our guys in a heartbeat to the point where the medics had to basically shovel out what was left of our guys and do their best to identify them. And this Georgian national ended up being a quadriplegic. So that's a single barrel EFP. That's when we really started to understand our own mortality.
Yeah, and the explosive form projectiles changed the game on us in a multitude of ways. Not only because they could pierce the armor on the Humvees, that was the biggest thing, right? Like in a sense, you felt like when you shut the door to the Humvee, you were fairly 95% safe from anything that had gone on. That was no longer the case, and so from that standpoint, it became a game changer. We tried several different tactics to try to thwart them. We would extend an arm out that went like 5 feet out from the front of the Humvee that would try to be the tripwire first if there was something that wasn't command detonated, to try and let the projectile go before the vehicle actually rolled over it. They started sticking armor plates underneath, like flat out underneath the vehicle. And I remember when I was there that they had whole units from the 10th Mountain that welders were going nuts, and they were just sticking 6 inches pieces of steel plating underneath. Now think about a Humvee, for those who don't know, this thing doesn't travel much more than 50 miles an hour anyway. Add an extra, iron plate underneath that basically covers the entire engine of a Humvee that's about 9 to 10 feet long. I mean, this thing is stuck going at 30 miles an hour at top speed, and you are a slow-sitting duck target. But in the same respect, the thought process was that the more armor we can throw on this thing, the safer people will be. Reasonable minds can choose to disagree whether that was the right tactic or not, but we tried a lot of different things, and it was a constant chess match back and forth. What the enemy did, we had to counteract, and then when they figured out that we counteracted it, they came up with a new tactic. And so round and round we went for a really long time, and in the process, a lot of lives were lost.
Yeah, man, it's funny you mentioned that arm. So I drew the first schematics for the first arm we put on the trucks, and our lead vehicle was the first one to run it in theater. And it was at that point a steel arm with a rubber mud flap on it. Before people a lot smarter than me got a hold of it and started putting things like glow plugs and things like that in it to make it a lot hotter. But that's you're right, man. I'll tell you, you start welding things on those trucks, and 10,000 pounds of extra armor. So yeah, the engines aren't meant for it and everything else, but whew, that air conditioner, man, it sure didn't keep up.
No, to say the least. Let me ask you, go back to that first one where you said you lost 4 of your guys. The initial reaction you had, that when you saw guys come in and they were laughing and joking, and even though the vehicle was blown up, then you have that happen. How does your emotion swing?
It sucks the life right out of you. I mean, like a vacuum in your face, sucking the wind out of your lungs. And watching, your medics chisel guys that out of a vehicle, and it changed everything in that very instant. It wasn't fun anymore, and it was very much us versus them, and we're not going to lose.
Did you regret anything? Any of your decisions that you had made? Did you think you walked in this capriciously at this point in time?
Absolutely not. I mean, it was never about me. The only thing that, the funny thing was, not funny at all, the horrible thing was, you talk about the mentality, right? So we hear on the radio that this has happened, and, they call for a QRF to go out and get these guys to bring their vehicle back. And you had to fight us all off with a stick. Everybody in the company was going. We were ready to go now. So I don't think it changed the mission at all. And if anything, it solidified the bonds that were between us that, hey, this isn't a game. We've got to take care of each other, because out there, when it's 12 of us on the street, we're all we have.
So the roadside bombings and the vehicle bombings continue for you guys. Along with that, you guys were facing some other challenges as well, including, guys taking their own lives.
Yeah, so it was a long year. So all in between explosions, roadside bombs, indirect fire, I was in 11 different blasts.
Wow.
Mortars, rockets, grenades, roadside bombs. There were a lot of them. So I think the incident that you're kind of working here to is, I guess, as the calendar flows, the next event. So, things were getting bad. They were getting rough, and we were out on a mission one day. It was us and another platoon. We were going through a hotter area, so we traveled a little heavier. And the vehicle behind me was hit with. No, I'm sorry. It was the vehicle in front of me. It was a Chevy Tahoe. It was hit with an EFP, and it had gone off just a split second early. And just to give you all an idea of how powerful these things are. So, for me, the first wake up I had with how strong these explosives were was on this day where the bomb went straight through the engine block of this Tahoe and out the other side of the truck. And what really hammered it home for me was what I saw when it did to the front side of an M1 Abrams, it's like 3 foot thick of armor, right? And when you see what it can do, I mean, there's nothing you can do to stop it. So, Mark talked about all the things we did in haste to try and protect ourselves, but when you really understand just the physics behind this blast, there's nothing you can do. So we were out that day, and these folks that were in the vehicle in front of me were very lucky. The truck in front of us got some antennas blown off and things like that. Our truck had some superficial damage, in that Tahoe that took the brunt of it, straight through, a half second later, and they would have all been done. So at that point, our platoon split. Half the platoon stayed back to continue securing the site, and the other half of us took some of these other folks that were in the Tahoe back to the hospital, the Cash Hospital, Combat Sport Hospital in the Green Zone. So a little bit of interesting, I guess, twist to my story is I was assigned to work with, as a junior enlisted person, as a lieutenant specifically. This guy, I definitely won't give his name. Great guy, a real smart person. Had zero business in the military. So, at that point in time, we were taking a lot of people who otherwise probably wouldn't be taken. And the officer corps was the same way. So this guy had come in, great guy, super friendly, didn't have a lot of common sense. So given my background and understanding that we were peers in a way, even though I was much junior than him in rank, we had a similar educational background. We had a similar upbringing. So the idea was that I would work with him and tactfully manage up. So one of the responsibilities I had every day when we got back was I cleared his weapon. Just to kind of give you an idea.
Wait, he couldn't clear his own weapon?
It wasn't that he didn't. The senior leadership needed validation that it had been done.
Oh my God.
So if that gives you any idea.
Oh God.
So on this day, I had come back with the platoon sergeant to take those folks to the hospital, and he'd stayed back as the command element to secure that site. So that day, I didn't clear his weapon. And that night, we'd all come back and everything. We were going to our platoon brief, and my buddy Joe happened to be in the hallway when this LT was walking by, and he just jokes. He says, "Hey, LT, is your weapon unloaded?" And this guy proceeds to put his M4 in the guy's temple and say, "Yeah, see," and pulled the trigger, and it wasn't.
Oh no!
Yeah, so that was that was just a few bunks down from me. And obviously, I mean, we're in a safe space, right? Relatively safe. We're in a safe space. You don't expect to hear that. So we all pop out. And I'll never forget that sight of this guy just, 6'2" frame collapsed in a pool of this guy's blood, and two of the NCOs just dragging him out. And that was a whole different experience.
Oh my God. So
yeah. So if
okay.
if all that wasn't enough, go ahead.
What happened to the lieutenant?
So he was assigned to brigade headquarters nowhere near us while he was waiting his trial. So, mind you, we're reeling. People are continuing to die. Things continue to blow up. All the while, I'm preparing to testify in the murder trial of one of my friends killing one of my friends. So it was a rough summer in Baghdad.
Oh, God. How did it turn out?
He gave he was sentenced to Leavenworth for 36 months, minus 6 months of credit he was given for the time leading up to his trial and transfer back to the States. So he basically served, to my knowledge, 30 months, maybe a little less for good behavior.
Was it a plea deal, or that's what the judge came down with?
That's what the colonel came down with. Honestly, Mark, I don't remember what the plea was. I don't remember if he pled guilty or not guilty.
But I mean, they charged him with murder?
Negligent manslaughter.
Okay.
Yeah. You look at what some of the other people that you look at the SEAL commander right now who's under trial for other things, and you look at what he's being charged with in the line of duty versus what this guy basically got away with. It's crazy. I mean, war is crazy. That is crazy. It's just one of those things.
Do you feel any guilt at all because you weren't there to clear his weapon?
For a long time. And for a long time, I was made to feel that way. So
why?
As I was working with the attorneys and we're preparing for the trial, they were basically threatening me with, you could also be charged. You could be charged in connection with this. You were, it was your responsibility to clear his weapon. You didn't do it. This could be on you. And, in hindsight, knowing what I know now, those are scare tactics, right? They're trying to get you to say things. And
yeah.
But you know what? As a kid overseas, at that point in time, carrying that guilt, it was horrible. And for the longest time, that was a hard pill to swallow.
I can't even imagine. I mean, what did people say to you? Like when your fellow platoon mates heard about it, what did they say to you about it?
Not a word. It was nobody in the platoon would ever say a word because we all knew him. And nobody in our company, for that matter, would say a word because we all knew him. It was just these attorneys that had a job to do. They were pushing to try and get different information. Again, in hindsight, they were trying to pull out, other opportunities where he may have been negligent. But the tactics were very personal. And while I can respect the job of the attorney, the tactics, I don't think I can ever really get past, given the circumstances, given where we were at and what we were doing. But my platoon mates, nobody who mattered. Obviously, every person's responsible for clearing their own weapon.
Yeah.
And I had an added duty, but that didn't make me liable.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Anybody could even, and anybody who's a soldier would look at that objectively and go, it's ridiculous to blame you. How the hell can you have an officer who can't understand the concept of clearing their own weapon? I mean, it's just on its merit. It's silly to say that an officer needs to be babysit like that, and it's almost embarrassing for me as part of the officer corps to hear that, but different discussion for a different time. Okay, so in addition to that whole thing, you've also had some suicides go on, correct?
So the suicides weren't until later.
Okay.
Those were after we got back. We didn't have any suicides happen in theater. I think just the pace of what was happening, there was no time to even think about that. I mean, things were just that fast, that furious.
All right. Well,
I don't think anyone had time to process.
Take me to December of 2005. What happened to you?
Yeah, man. So between April and then June, when that incident happened, we had another guy, Carrasquillo, who lost his life protecting his convoy against a vehicle-borne IED. He was basically on his 50 until the bomb went off, and then he didn't make it. And then things were pretty quiet for a few months. I don't know if we were just extra vigilant or what it was. But so
you mentioned real quick. Sorry to cut you off. You mentioned real quick that we didn't have time. Does that mean you didn't have time as well to mourn the loss of your fellow platoon mates and everything? I mean, was that something you just scanned, discard, move on? We'll deal with it later for you.
I think we all did it the same, Mark.
Okay.
I mean, we had the combat memorials where if you weren't on mission, you came to the memorial service. Boots, rifle, helmet, dog tags. Chaplain says a few words, everybody gives their respects, and you roll on. But that's it. I mean, we were rolling hard. We would typically go 3 weeks nonstop on op, and then we would do one quote unquote down week where we were either on camp security or QRF. But even then, those are 12-hour shifts. So we would typically have 1 day off, 3 weeks on rotation, and then 1 week on security and QRF, but always 12-hour days, ops, gym, bed. And that was it.
Makes sense. Wash, rinse, repeat. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
No. So, yeah, all good. So, yeah, during that time, we'd lost Carrasquillo. There was a lot of inbound ordnance. There was a lot of near misses out on the road, our platoon and others. And during this time, understand that my platoon's also reeling, right? So we had just lost a leader. We had there was a few great guys that stood in temporarily while they were looking for a permanent replacement. So at this point, we were kind of labeled as damaged. We'd been through a lot, and that had happened, and it fractured us. So they were looking for a special kind of leader to come in and help us, and they found one. So this guy, Kevin Smith, he was West Point grad, but he wasn't your typical West Point grad. So he grew up maybe 20 miles down the road from me in a small town in Pennsylvania, which understand in where I grew up, 20 miles down the road might as well be around the block. So I knew his family knew mine. He went to West Point on a soccer scholarship, and his sophomore year, his roommate was on the skeet team, and they got back from a meet late one night, and his roommate brought his shotgun in the room, put it under the mattress, went to sleep, didn't want to deal with weapons check he'd get in the morning. Kevin's asleep, right? But the next morning, when they did the weapons check and it wasn't there, they both got thrown out of West Point. Kevin broke the honor code even though he was asleep, right? His roommate's guilty, he's guilty too. So Kevin ended up going enlisted, and he had to write the commandant every single day for I think 2 years. He did a rotation in Bosnia as a PFC, and he wrote the commandant every day about what he learned and why he thought it'd make him a better cadet. So after 2 years, he ended up getting himself back into West Point and graduated. And he was assigned to an air defense artillery battalion, and at that point they were on rear detachment. And he was just a few months short of his promotion to captain. So he was a first lieutenant on his way to a staff position before getting his first company command. And when this came down, that this platoon down range needed some help, he volunteered. His family asked him not to. His fiance didn't want him to go. She had a bad feeling. But him being the kind of guy he was, he said, you know what, there's guys that maybe I'm going to go. So he came, and I think for the first month, nobody talked to him. Like he was the command, he was the platoon leader, and he gave the mission briefs. And aside from that, nobody talked to him. Like we had no use for him. Kevin was a very PT oriented guy. He was always saying, hey, let's go for a run. Let's go to the gym. Let's do something. And none of us talked to him. And maybe over the course of 4 months, so I think he got there maybe in July, maybe August, I don't remember. He eventually won us over just by being him and being authentic and just being a real person. He wasn't one of these, fresh out of, wherever officers were going to come in and they're going to fix everything and run the show. I think, he realized, for one, that wasn't his personality, and two, you can't take a platoon that's been in theater at that point for 7 or 8 months and who has gone through some of the things that we had gone through and expect that you're going to come in and tell them what to do, especially with no combat patch on your arm. Who's this first lieutenant coming in, no combat patch, telling us how to run our mission after we've been in theater and doing it every single day nonstop?
Right. He
was never that guy. So he eventually won us over, and, he became, again, understand that, I'm a junior enlisted guy. But he became one of my best friends that I've ever had in my life, just by him being him and us having similarities and a special bond. So morning of December 8th, let me back up and say that I'm not a very religious person, but out of everything that's happened throughout these deployments, I'm very spiritual. And the weird thing is, I didn't recognize it maybe the first time, but maybe the second or third time where something had happened, I had a really weird feeling every morning going out to the truck, and it was just this distinct feeling that somebody was with me, somebody was walking with me. And, imagine 11 separate incidents, and every one of those incidents, I had this feeling. It was the strangest thing. So we had gotten an op brief, I guess it would be on December 7th, And it was one of those things where we just looked at each other and we just knew we were screwed. I mean, something was going to happen. There was no way around it. The route was an off-limits route.
Don't you love that?
Yeah, like, you know it. And you all look at each other and you're like, shit, well, this is going to be a long day. And that night, I got so sick. I mean, it was just like the Baghdad crud. I mean, I was in the bathroom all night. It was a rough one. You know, and he came in that morning. He's like, hey, just stay back. You don't need to go. And I looked at him and I said, there's no fucking way you're keeping me from going today. And I don't know why. So we got out there, we got to the trucks, and we were just doing weird things we'd never done before. We were taking pictures. The colonel came over and said, you guys are gonna have a great run today. Godspeed. And we just looked at each other and we're like, oh God. And then as we're rolling out of the gate, the chaplain comes running over and he stops us and he says, before you all leave, I want to say a prayer.
Yeah, kiss of death.
And we're like, oh God, just make it stop. So we roll and we're just waiting. And, you know, we take this right on a route, and man, for the life of me, I can't remember what it was called. I can tell you exactly how to get there. I can't remember the name of it, but you go kind of across Bridge 1 through the international zone. You go through the market. You go over the first overpass of the main highway, the second overpass, take a right. Whatever that restricted route was, that's where we're at. And we were just counting overpasses until we got to where we were going. And we were doing, you know, kind of the weave in one side, out of the other side, kind of under the overpasses. And I remember coming out of the one overpass, and I said, how much further, LT? And then it just, like, it happened. The dust kicked. I felt like somebody smashed me in the face with a baseball bat, and it was like a movie. Everything was just slow motion. And I pushed the gas on that Humvee all the way to the floor, and that thing, I don't know how far it went. I give that thing credit. AM General, they make one hell of an engine. This thing had penetrators through and through the block as well, but it took us well out of the kill zone before it eventually died. And I looked over to Kevin. He was gone. In the back seat, we actually had Kevin's replacement, Terry, which I believe you may have met. He was that guy, though. He was the officer that came in that was going to fix everything. He was the giant a-hole straight out of the Citadel. So we didn't talk to him, but we'll get to him in a minute. So he was in the back seat. He'd been in country maybe 2 weeks. He looked dead. My buddy Krebs was in the turret, and his legs were just Swiss cheese. And
how did you know Kevin was gone? I mean, you could just tell the blast.
You can tell.
Okay.
I mean, you look over, he's slumped over in his seat. He's just gone. I mean, you know, when you see somebody who's gone, you know, when you look at them, there's no question. They're just gone. And he was, in that moment, just gone. You know, there 1 minute, tell me how far to our objective, and then just gone.
Wow. Okay, so your gunner is still alive, though, but he's obviously wounded.
Yeah. So Krebs, to give you a little bit of insight to his personality, right? So this guy, we called him SF. That's all he ever wanted to do in life was be SF. I mean, he had the swagger like that. He was going to be that guy. So he was up there in the turret, screaming and cutting loose on his 240. He was in a lot of pain. And, you know, his story, fast forward however many years it's been, he's actually contracting. He put himself through all the rehab, and he's back downrange now. Private contractor, but he did it. He was that determined. And Terry, for that matter, the guy that was in the back seat, he's in another federal service, continuing to serve. So, I mean, those guys really tore up, but they've made the full comeback, and they're still doing it. So it's crazy.
When you look around and survey the damage inside the vehicle at that point in time, what's your first thought?
I don't know. I really don't. I remember checking everybody in the truck, and there was another officer, Ted, that was in the back seat. He had some superficial, just skin level penetrators, but he was okay. And then I remember the guys in the vehicle behind us. Actually, let me back up. I remember an Abrams, and this is I was knocked unconscious, and I don't know how long, because there was nobody near us. We were the only patrol out. And when I woke up, it seemed like there was an Abrams on my driver's side door immediately. And I don't know where that Abrams came from. I don't know how long it took him to get there, but they were there. Then they pried the doors open. They pulled me out, threw me in another Humvee. They threw Terry on top of me. And so we were with, I think, an Iraqi national who started doing CPR on, or not CPR, but started doing tourniquets on Terry, and I pushed him off of me. I went out of the truck and I went to try and help Krebs because they were trying to get him out of the turret. So I went over to him and I was trying to help him. And at the same time, they were prying Kevin's door open with a tanker's bar, which, if for those of you that don't know, that's a really long crowbar that you use to basically change the treads on a tank. So it's a serious piece of equipment. And they were using that to pry his door open. I remember when they did, just the blood pouring out of the door onto the asphalt.
Wow.
And then they grabbed Krebs and I, and they threw us in the back of a Bradley, and they evac'd us. There was a fob right there. I don't remember what it was called, but there was a helipad there. They took us into their aid station, did a lot of triage. At this point, I didn't even know I was hurt.
I was going to say, did you ever do any self-assessment of what was going on with you?
No, I thought I was good. I had no idea. So I was sitting out there. They took Terry and Krebs into the I guess the back part of the aid station, and I'm just sitting there in the waiting area. One of the medics comes out. He's like, hey, come back, let us check you out. And I'm like, no, man, don't worry about it. I'm good. And he said, no, come on, just let us look at you. You had your bell rung. Let's check you out. And so I walked back with him, and as soon as I sat down on the gurney, just blood started pouring out of the sleeve of my jacket. And I looked over, and my entire sleeve was just red. And so the medic was there, and like, he obviously knows, right? Because he can see that my DCU top is soaked in blood. And I look at him like, hey, doc, maybe I'm not so good. And he's like, yeah, let's give you something for that. And he gave me my first shot of morphine, and then after that, nothing else mattered. So from there until we were at the helipad waiting, we were in the back of an ambulance. I don't remember a lot of what happened there. So at this point, Terry, Krebs, and myself were all hopped up on morphine. And this poor nurse. So Terry, like I said, he was just that giant a-hole fresh out of Citadel. This was December. He graduated in like October. So we're sitting there, we're waiting, and we're in the ambulance, and Terry's right above me, and he looks down and he says, hey, nurse, I outrank you. And I've been a jerk to these guys for the last few months because I thought it was cool. And I understand that you guys only give weed to people that are messed up. Well, these guys are messed up, and I need to make them think I'm cool, so give them all weed. And at that point, I realized, I'm like, all right, this guy's not so bad. And then they loaded us in a helicopter. They took us to the combat support hospital downtown Baghdad. And so Terry was probably the most critical of all of us. So he was the first on, first off. And I'll never forget, as they pulled him out of the helicopter, he looks down at me, and he grabs my hand, and he says, we're blood brothers now. I just bled my ass blood in your mouth. We are now blood brothers. And so Terry, like he was sitting in the backseat of the truck, and penetrators had basically gone, through his butt cheeks, through both of his knees, both of his thighs, both of his feet, and both of his forearms. And he was just a hot mess. I mean, he was bleeding through the Black Hawk on me. And yeah, that we've been brothers ever since. We talk all the time. I love that guy to death. And Krebs too, for that matter. If he happens to be listening, I'm not leaving him out.
What was the ultimate diagnosis of you?
So for me, I had penetrators that were through and through my right arm, severed my ulnar median nerve.
Oh, wow.
Man, I'll tell you, Mark, I don't, again, I'm not a very religious person, spiritual, yes. You look at these x-rays, it doesn't make sense. If you look at the entrance wound and exit wound in my arm, I shouldn't have an arm. It should have taken the bone and just taken the whole thing off. This penetrator, and I still have it today, I mean, it's the size of a quarter. It went in my arm, around my bone, and out of the other side into my chest, but it never touched that bone. I mean, I should have lost my arm. I should have lost my lungs and my heart and everything.
Why'd you save it?
I mean, why wouldn't I? I mean, that thing, one day I keep telling myself, I'm going to do something with it, but it just sits in my box in my office, and it's just one of those things, man. And so at the time, I didn't know what happened. And it wasn't until several months later when I got back and I met Kevin's fiance. And so she was a nurse. So when he came back, she was his next of kin. She asked all these questions, and she got access that, she probably shouldn't have had. But she saw everything. She saw him. She saw all of the autopsy details and everything else. And basically what had happened was his body had taken all the penetrators. So to kind of reflect back to something I said earlier, For contrast, the first 3 guys that we lost were a single barrel EFP. The one that hit us was the biggest found in theater to that point. It was an 8 barrel. And Kevin had taken the majority of those in his torso, and through the autopsy and through like the schematics that they drew of the blast, the piece that came into me had gone through him, out of his heart, through his armor, through my armor, into my chest. And he saved my life. Consciously, subconsciously, whatever it was, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here. And that piece of metal that came out of his heart is the reason why I do everything that I do today.
Well, look, wow, powerful stuff. When you think back to that day and that moment and everything that went on, survivor's guilt is a real thing, but how do you process all this all these years later?
So survivor's guilt's an interesting thing, and everybody processes things differently. Knowing Kevin the way that I do, if you would have gambled, there's no way you'd have won that argument. In any argument, you versus him, it would have been him every single time, or he would have knocked your face off so you would go out cold so he could have made it him. I knew that about him. And I never felt guilt that I was here and he wasn't. Now, the gap that I had to fill was, this was an amazing man that was going to do an amazing thing in life. And he left really big shoes to fill. And where I guess I have the survivor's guilt is I've got to live up to the gap he left in the world. And I take that as my personal responsibility. And, everything that I've done since I got out and everything that I'll do for the rest of my life is it's meant to fill that gap. It's not about me. It's about filling this gap in the world that was left by this man who volunteered to do something that he shouldn't have had to do and pay the ultimate price as a result.
You ever talk to his family?
So his fiance and I, Dana, we were really good friends for a lot of years. She ended up marrying a guy who is an operator, and she's still in the military. She was an Air Force nurse herself, so she had separated at that point, and she was working as civilian nursing. So once they got married and she had a son and moved on with her life, I really haven't stayed in contact. She's moved on, and it's important to respect her family now.
Right, sure.
Yeah, but it's really the 3 of us, Terry, Krebs, and myself. We carry that on every December 8th. It's lightened up a lot in recent years. It used to be we get together and just act like complete grunts, trying to drink the bar dry in his honor. And I think now it's been more kind of reflective with our families, and we still contact each other and reach out. There was one, actually, you mentioned Under Armour. There was one opportunity where we had, I think it was for the Utah game, where we did one of the Warrior games, and it was Terry, myself, I think Krebs was overseas at that point, and the other guy, Ted, and we all got to be together and kind of do the whole honor captain thing on that day, and represent Terry with the University of Utah. And that was actually one of Andy Dalton's last games in college when he just decimated Utah that day before going to the Bengals. But yeah, it's been a pretty cool thing. It's the brotherhood that's resulted. But there's still a lot of responsibility and a lot of work left to do.
You were medically retired. Frustrations about that? Anger? Okay with it?
So that's a loaded question. I'll say yes and no. So when I got out and when I was going through the system, things weren't ready yet. They weren't ready for the volume of guys that were coming back messed up.
They're still not ready now, Adam. You know that, right?
Well, it's got to be better than it was. So
true, it has. But when you're at rock bottom, you can only go up.
In fact. So when I first separated in September of 2006, my retirement didn't process until sometime in 2012. It took him 6 years to process.
Right. Yeah, dear Lord.
And that wasn't even the VA claim. That was just my military retirement. I think in hindsight, I think that there was a lot left unfinished. There was a lot more I could have done to help other people prepare for those missions. And for a lot of years, and hell, when you and I first met, I was still trying to figure out how to get back in. And I think I eventually realized that there was a lot more that I could do for the world and a lot more that I could do to live up to Kevin's void that wasn't in that, right? That there was other things I could do to impact people and make a difference in people's lives that weren't in the military. So for a lot of years, I was looking for different ways in. Like I was trying to train up and contract or train up and try and find somebody at MEPS who's willing to pretend that I didn't have all these residual things and that wouldn't ask me to put my hands over my head and all these things that I can't do. And eventually I just woke up and said, you know what, this is my life and I've got to maximize it. I can't live in the past and be stuck in this thing that happened so many years ago.
Speaking of so many years ago, you said the thing that would scare your mother the most when all of this went down and she had to hear this story. Obviously, you know, I'm sure she was emotional about it, but how did that make you feel?
So I don't remember. I was on a lot of morphine for a long time. And I think by the time I saw her, she was just happy to see me. And I understand at this point in time too, my family and I weren't on the best terms, and they weren't really a part of my life. And it wasn't until maybe just the last several years where we've really kind of made amends. So I think, you know, now to look back at what I put her through, I feel horrible. I think at the time it wasn't really on my radar.
Was the military and this incident the facilitator of sort of helping reunite you with your family?
It wasn't. And if anything, it was kind of the wedge for a long time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because I felt like I had something different to do. I felt like I had something more important to do. And it wasn't until I kind of got over that where I had room to let them back in my life.
Now, I know that, you know, you've obviously moved on. You're married now, and, you know, your life is different from when all this stuff had gone on. You know, you say you have Kevin with you every single day. How much of the rest of the experience is still with you?
It depends on the day. So, I mean, honestly, last night, so I watched that Bush movie that I mentioned, and there was a lot of real shots in there from, you know, our time overseas. And that kind of messed me up last night. I would say that I think about it every day. I think there are a few days now where it's a significant factor in my life. There's other residual things that impact me every day. You know, I mean, I travel full time. You know, I've traveled full time for almost 12 years now. And I still struggle to get on a plane. When I was being evac'd out, finally, we were on a C-130 transport, and there was surface to air, like flying by the airplane, and we were doing combat dives and evasive maneuvers, and it scared me. And I still struggle getting on planes, and I still struggle in public spaces, and all of those things that, you know, so many people from our generation deal with. I mean, that stuff is there, and it's a struggle. I compartmentalize it. You know, I deal with it because I have to, but it's definitely still there. I think there's certain times of the year where I remember certain things more than others. And I know there's a lot of things I forget too. But I think for me, the broader mission of what I have to do transcends the hard things that I also have to deal with.
It's interesting you brought up the things that you forget, and I'm at that same stage. You know, like I said, I'm coming up on 20 years, and a lot of the memories that I had that were so sharp, I guess, because of what's gone on now. Geez, we're almost coming up on 15 years since my first deployment.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like with that all gone, part of me feels like I'm losing a sense of what was the best part of my military career and the best experience, despite the fact that so many bad things had happened. And to that end, I had a crazy thought the other day. I'm like, you know, as this thing is starting to wind down, I kind of feel like I want to deploy again. Like, I kind of feel like it's a really weird, surreal thing. Like, I have kids now, and the game has changed for me completely 100%, but there's a part of me that just wants one last hurrah. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just one more, as crazy and stupid as it sounds, but it's like a moment in the sun, you know, to do what we do best and what we've trained to do. And I know when I think about it hard, like really dive in, I think 3 weeks in now, I go, oh, what the hell was I thinking? This is, this is crazy at this point in time, because it's almost like the connection is what I'm losing. And that's what I kind of desire to have back.
Man, it was the simplest, best time of life. If you really think about it.
It is. I said sometimes deployment, if all you have to worry about is staying alive every day, sometimes it's the easiest thing to do.
And that's it. I mean, you're sitting there, you're messing around with the guys that are around you, just like playing stupid jokes and nut slap and all the stupid things that we used to do. But it was easy. All of just the dumb things of life didn't matter. It was wake up, get some food, don't die, go to the gym, do it tomorrow. And that was it. There was nothing else to do. And you're right. Now, time erases all the crap, right? So all the dumb things. I mean, look, you're an officer, so you don't have to deal with a lot of the same crap that we had to deal with. But, I mean, stupid things like clean the oil spots out of the motor pool in the rain. Those days, I can tell you right now, I don't miss. Pick up all the rocks from, like, the platoon area outside of the company in Georgia, where the entire ground is rocks. I mean, those are the things that we forget, right? Because they were stupid and they were horrible. You look back now, it's kind of funny, but I didn't want to do it then. But just the brotherhood, right? And then, being an adult now, and I guess I was an adult then, I'm still an adult. But looking at the relationships, and I've got a great network right now, and I have a lot of great people, and I've met a lot of great people and very, close personal friends. But nothing replaces those relationships and those bonds. And, somebody like you, Mark, I was thinking the last time I saw you was on a really awkward double date, but we won't go into that too much. But
yeah, let's
but nonetheless, it's been a while. But it doesn't matter. And, there's guys that I haven't seen in 15 years, but it doesn't matter because those relationships know no time. And, I look at people, who you work with now. I mean, I do a lot of client engagements where, I'll be with a company or a team for years on end. And then when I'm done, I spent more clock time with these people, with these clients than I did anybody else in the military with. But when we're done, we're done. And I never see them again. And I rarely think about them again. And those relationships just fade. And I analyze that a lot, right? Why is that? What is it about human connection that on some levels is so superficial and on others is so deep and meaningful? And then I get stuck in this, how do I recreate that? Being almost 40-year-old guy now, the pool of friends that you have is really small, and the people that you trust is even smaller. And for me, it really comes back to, I've got Terry, I've got Krebs. I haven't seen him in years, but, they're my go-to. Why is it that those two guys are basically it? And all of these people that I see every day, and all these people that I interact with at conferences and professionally and everything else, what's different about those relationships? And that's one thing I've struggled to put my finger on. And maybe I overanalyze it, but it's difficult nonetheless.
Well, again, the human condition, and it's just war. I mean, it is unspeakable what it does to people, and going through it with somebody is an experience that cannot be broken, and not even in death, because as you've mentioned repeatedly, Kevin's with you every single day. Sure, it removes the physical connection between the two individuals, but that bond, that spiritual bond, that emotional connection you have to the individual never dies. And to that end, you take it with you wherever you go. And sometimes it's a burden for certain people, and other people can use it as a blessing, and the myriad of emotions that go in between. But I think the big thing is that we harp on this a lot here on the podcast, is that there is a brotherhood, there is a connection that cannot be broken. And we see it a lot too with Vietnam guys, I mean, just for some background on the podcast and everything else. But we've talked repeatedly with those guys about, how still after 50 years, the guys that they talk to, they're in tears together, just celebrating life, that they're still here because of everything that they went through. And so I hope that we'll have that same sort of connection with our brothers, another 30 years down the road. But obviously time will tell.
Yeah, man, for sure. Let's just hope that it's maybe on a triathlon course instead of a smoky VFW.
You ain't kidding. And real quick, before we wrap things up here, just what you're doing now, working with one of the world's most respected management and strategy and consulting firms, your day-to-day life, what's it like?
Yeah, man, it's actually great. So I've taken a lot of the things that I've learned through this whole experience about, valuing connections and valuing life. And I've really focused on trying to help organizations humanize themselves. It's kind of funny when you look at where it all started and all those years ago to where we're at now. It was kind of like it was meant to be. So where we're at today in 2019 with business and the kind of work that people do, it's very different. So when corporate policy was written, we were building things. And the things that motivated people when we build things are a lot different than what motivate people now. And the kind of work that we're doing now is also very different. So you could motivate somebody to put brakes on a train faster. If you say, hey, I'll give you an extra $5 if you exceed quota today. You can still have a job if you meet quota, but if you fall below quota, well, I'm going to fire you. And that works for that sort of work. But when you look at the work that people do today, when it's like, hey, we're programming self-driving cars and we're building AI, you don't want to use those same management philosophies because you don't want the person building your self-driving car to be scared, right? You want them focused on doing the right thing to make sure that you don't kill yourself. So the work that we do is really about how do we change corporate philosophy and management structures and performance management and things like that, so that people aren't worried about those things, so that we're constantly developing people and growing new skills because business is getting faster and more technical every day. And how do we just make business so that it's a little less about the bucks, right? It's a little less about what Wall Street says, and it's a little more about a different kind of purpose. And I think, my generation and the next generation down is really motivated by that, right? How do we have a purpose? Life is short. Life is precious. How do we make sure that the things that we're doing every day are making the world a better place and not just padding some Wall Street dude's balance sheet? And it's been a really enlightening journey, both in terms of, companies who are motivated by that and companies who think it's not a thing. And I've been doing this enough years now to see that the companies who didn't buy into it and thought it was just a bunch of hippie stuff, they're not doing too well right now. And some of the companies I've worked with have actually closed down because they refuse to change. And the companies that have been motivated by this are doing exceptionally well. And they're the ones they're kind of pushing the envelope, and they're the ones that are doing, things that are more focused on how do we make things a little bit better every time we touch them. And there's a lot more to it than that. I won't get into the nerdy stuff, but it's a really cool thing. And when I, again, look back at kind of my transcendent purpose and what I feel like I need to do to honor Kevin, I feel like, there's something to this, and there's something to the difference that I'm able to help other people make in the world. And it's not about me, Mark. 99% of the time, most of the things that I say to clients for, my billable rate are, well, have you talked to him or her? And what do you think about that? But it's really it's challenging people to look at the world different and consider different outcomes. It's a really cool thing. And apparently there's something to it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have inadvertently wound up where I am now. So it's a cool thing.
Well, brother, listen, I admire you. You know that. I got nothing but respect for you, everything that you've done and accomplished, and for all the battle scars, both physical and non-physical, that you carry with you every day. You know that I'm always here, a phone call away, just in case you ever need anything. But certainly, I thank you for your time and certainly your candor and honesty in sharing the story with everybody. It's important, and we want to continue to tell them all. But as a friend, I love hearing it from you, brother. I really do.
Man, and Mark, thank you for doing all the things that you do too. You've had the opportunity to do a lot of really cool things in life, but you always keep it grounded, and you always, make time to make sure that the people who need help have it. And it's a really cool thing, and I hope that's something you can hold on to.
Thanks, brother. I really appreciate that. Honored to have you on, Adam Mattis. Thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Mark, thank you.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.